The baby was born before the father arrived, and in the silent seconds after that first cry, Rachel Bennett understood that something far more fragile than her body had just broken. The delivery room at St. Mary's Medical Center in Chicago pulsed with white light and urgency as nurses moved quickly around her, their calm voices guiding her through pain that felt endless and merciless. Her fingers gripped the sheets as another contraction tore through her, fierce and consuming, yet through it all her eyes kept drifting to the door. Daniel had promised he would be there. He had said nothing in the world would keep him away. But the hallway remained empty, and promises she realized could dissolve as quickly as breath in winter air. At 12:17 in the morning, Noah entered the world with a cry that cut through the sterile stillness like lightning. The tension in the room shifted instantly. A nurse placed the small trembling body against Rachel's chest, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. She traced the curve of his cheek with shaking fingers, tears streaming freely down her face as she whispered his name. Noah. The name she had spoken softly to herself during long evenings in their downtown apartment when she still believed that love was steady and unshakable. He was warm and real and perfect. His tiny hand curled instinctively against her skin, anchoring her to something solid, while the rest of her life seemed to tilt. Then the door opened. Daniel Carter stepped inside without urgency, without apology. At 35, he carried the confidence of a man accustomed to power, a senior executive at one of Chicago's fastest-growing tech firms, accustomed to making decisions that shifted markets. His coat hung perfectly over his shoulders, his hair still in place, his expression controlled and unreadable. He looked like a man arriving from a board meeting, not from another woman's embrace. The scent of unfamiliar perfume reached Rachel before he did, soft but undeniable. She noticed it instantly. She noticed the faint smear of deep plum lipstick near his collar as well. Not hers. Never hers. "I came as fast as I could," Daniel said evenly, though his breathing was steady and his eyes lacked urgency. His gaze lingered on the baby only briefly before dropping to his phone. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes as his thumb moved quickly across it, replying to someone unseen. Rachel watched him, exhaustion sharpening her senses rather than dulling them. She had just endured hours of labor, yet she felt suddenly more awake than ever. The nurse stepped aside expectantly, waiting for him to reach for his son. He did not. Instead, he slid the phone back into his pocket with a small sigh that sounded like inconvenience. "You missed it," Rachel whispered, her voice fragile but steady. "Something important came up." Daniel replied, the words clipped and professional, the same tone he used when dismissing a subordinate's mistake. There was no softness in it, no apology. Noah shifted in her arms, his small body seeking warmth. Rachel held him tighter instinctively, protective. She searched Daniel's face for something familiar, some flicker of the man she had once believed in, but what she found instead was distance. He stepped closer to the crib, glanced down, and muttered under his breath, "This wasn't supposed to happen like this." He assumed she had not heard, but she had, every syllable. Exhaustion had stripped away illusion, leaving only clarity. Then came the words that changed everything. "My real family is waiting." The sentence slipped out softly, almost carelessly, yet it struck harder than any blow. The room felt suddenly colder. Rachel's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she stared at him, the father of the child resting against her chest. Real family. The implication was unmistakable. She and Noah were not it. Daniel adjusted his cuff as if nothing significant had been said. "You should rest," he added, already stepping backward. "We'll talk later." He did not touch her. He did not kiss his son. He did not stay. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality that echoed louder than a slam. Rachel pressed her lips against Noah's forehead, breathing in his warmth as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered indifferently against the dark lake, unaware that inside one small hospital room, a woman who had always been underestimated had just awakened to a truth she could no longer ignore. She had given birth to a son, and in the same hour she had watched her marriage die. When Rachel returned to the penthouse 3 days later, she knew something was wrong before she even stepped inside. The hallway was silent, the air too still, as if the space itself had been holding its breath. She balanced Noah carefully in his carrier while the nurse who had driven her from the hospital offered a polite goodbye, unaware that she was leaving Rachel alone in a home that no longer felt like one. The elevator doors slid shut behind her with a soft metallic whisper sealing her into the quiet. She reached for her keys with trembling fingers, exhaustion weighing down every movement, yet something colder than fatigue pressed heavier against her chest. The door opened to perfection. Immaculate floors, polished marble counters, furniture aligned with architectural precision. But there was no sign that a newborn was expected here. No crib assembled in the nursery. No folded blankets waiting. No scent of fresh laundry or formula. The room felt staged like a showroom untouched by real life. Rachel stepped inside slowly, her heels echoing faintly across the hardwood as she carried her son through a space that suddenly felt too large and too empty. She had imagined bringing Noah home to celebration, to flowers, to laughter. Instead, she brought him into silence. Daniel stood near the kitchen island, speaking quietly into his phone. He did not look surprised to see her. He did not rush forward. His back remained half-turned, his posture rigid as he murmured, "I told you not to call me here." The edge in his voice was sharp, impatient. Rachel froze in the hallway, the weight of Noah against her chest grounding her as she listened. There was a pause, and then his tone changed. Softer, warmer. "I miss you too." He said the words low and intimate in a way she had not heard directed at her in months. The shift in his voice sliced deeper than any accusation. He ended the call abruptly when he noticed her standing there. "You're home," he said flatly, slipping the phone into his pocket. His eyes moved briefly to Noah and then away again. "How was the discharge process?" The question sounded clinical, detached, as though he were inquiring about a shipment rather than his wife and child. Rachel searched his face for discomfort, for guilt, for any flicker of conscience. She found only irritation at being interrupted. She adjusted Noah's blanket gently and walked past him without answering. The nursery door stood slightly open at the end of the hallway. Rachel pushed it wider with her foot and stepped inside, her heart tightening at what she saw. The crib they had chosen together during her 7th month of pregnancy remained half-assembled. Screws and instructions still lay untouched in a plastic bag on the floor. Daniel had promised he would finish it the following weekend. That weekend had come and gone. She lowered Noah carefully into a bassinet she had purchased herself at the last minute, her movements slow and deliberate, as though preserving dignity through small acts of order. From the living room, Daniel's voice rose again, this time sharp with frustration. "No, you don't understand," he snapped into the phone. Then, almost instantly, his tone softened again into something intimate and unrecognizable. Rachel stepped quietly into the hallway, unseen. "She's exhausted," Daniel murmured. "She won't leave. She doesn't have anywhere to go." The word struck with quiet cruelty, not anger, not confusion, certainty. He believed she was trapped, dependent, weak. Rachel's fingers tightened around the edge of the doorway. "You're my future," Daniel continued softly. "Just give me time." The hallway seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Every promise he had once made to her echoed mockingly in her memory. The late-night conversations about building a family, the whispered dreams of growing old together. They sounded hollow now, like rehearsed lines delivered to the wrong audience. She stepped fully into view, and Daniel stiffened as he saw her. "How long have you been standing there?" he demanded, defensive rather than ashamed. Long enough, she replied quietly. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Rachel, don't make this dramatic. You just had a baby. You're emotional. The dismissal was immediate, practiced. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need stability right now. And I provide that. For you. For him. He gestured vaguely toward the nursery as though the child were a detail in a contract negotiation. Rachel studied him, realizing with painful clarity that this man did not fear losing her. He feared inconvenience. Image. Exposure. You don't have anywhere else. Daniel added, his tone cool and calculated. Be realistic. Something inside Rachel shifted again, not breaking this time, but hardening. She looked past him into the sleek reflection of the city skyline beyond the glass walls. Chicago glittered confidently below, unaware that within this expensive penthouse, the illusion of a perfect life was cracking open. Daniel believed she had no options. He believed she had surrendered herself entirely to his world, his name, his power. He had no idea how wrong he was. The truth did not shatter Rachel Bennett's world with noise. It settled into her bones like ice, quiet and irreversible. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Chicago penthouse, casting pale reflections across the marble kitchen where she stood holding her son only hours earlier. Now Noah slept in the bassinet nearby, unaware that his mother's heart was breaking in slow motion. Daniel had already left for work, his departure brisk and unemotional, as though fatherhood were simply another appointment he could reschedule. The apartment felt unnaturally polished, untouched by chaos, untouched by love. It looked perfect. It felt hollow. Daniel's laptop rested half open on the counter, its screen glowing faintly. Rachel had never been the kind of woman who searched through devices or doubted without proof. She had trusted him through late meetings, through unexplained trips, through growing emotional distance. She had tried to rationalize as stress. But something inside her had shifted since the hospital, since the whispered words about a real family. A soft notification chimed in the silence, and before she could stop herself, her eyes locked onto the name that appeared across the screen. Sophia Lawson. Her breath caught. The message preview was short, intimate, unmistakable. Last night was perfect. I miss you already. Our future is worth the wait. Rachel felt her pulse pound violently in her ears as she stepped closer and lifted the laptop fully open. The message thread expanded, revealing weeks of conversations layered with affection, planning, and promises that had never been meant for her. There were photographs. Daniel smiling across candlelit tables. Daniel leaning in close, his hand resting comfortably at Sophia's waist. Daniel looking relaxed, lighter, alive in a way Rachel had not seen in months. The images did not look accidental. They looked chosen. Another message blinked onto the screen as though the universe demanded completion of the betrayal. You will tell her after the quarter ends right. She deserves to know. You deserve a real family. The words burned. Real family. The same phrase he had murmured in the hospital now stood in black and white, undeniable and deliberate. Rachel stepped back, gripping the edge of the counter as nausea rose in her throat. Her marriage rearranged itself in her mind with brutal clarity. The distance, the indifference, the way Daniel had stopped touching her long before she noticed. The elevator doors slid open behind her, breaking the fragile silence. Daniel entered moments later, sunglasses shielding his eyes, coffee in hand. Confidence intact. He stopped when he saw the laptop open. The change in his posture was subtle but immediate. Irritation replaced surprise. He crossed the room quickly and shut the laptop with sharp finality. You had no right, he said evenly, his voice calm but edged with warning. Rachel did not raise her voice. Who is she? He removed his sunglasses, slowly revealing eyes that held calculation rather than guilt. You're exhausted, he replied. You're making this bigger than it is. The dismissal was deliberate, controlled. He spoke to her the way he would address a nervous investor. Rachel's exhaustion vanished beneath a surge of clarity. I read everything she said, her tone steady despite the tremor in her chest. The silence between them thickened. Daniel exhaled slowly as if deciding whether honesty was worth the inconvenience. Sophia understands me, he said finally. She fits my life. The words were not shouted. They were stated. A conclusion reached long ago. Rachel felt the final thread inside her snap quietly. And what am I? She asked. Daniel did not hesitate. You were never meant to be permanent. The cruelty lay not in anger, but in calm certainty. Behind her, Noah stirred softly a small, fragile sound that cut through the tension. Rachel turned instinctively toward her son, and in that movement something powerful settled inside her. Daniel continued speaking, outlining practicality, stability, image. He spoke of timing and strategy as though dismantling a marriage were a corporate restructuring. You will stay, he added. It's better for everyone. Better for everyone. Rachel looked at him then with eyes no longer pleading. He believed she had nowhere to go. He believed the life he provided defined her worth. He believed she would accept humiliation in exchange for comfort. What Daniel did not know, what he had never truly understood, was that the woman he underestimated had been quietly stronger than he imagined for a long time. And as she stood there, heart fractured, but mind awakening, she realized something vital. She was not the one trapped. He was. The decision did not arrive with drama. It formed slowly like steel hardening under pressure. That evening, as twilight settled over Chicago and the skyline burned gold against the lake, Rachel sat in the nursery with Noah asleep against her chest and felt something inside her shift from pain to resolve. Daniel had left again, claiming another late dinner with investors, his tone detached and efficient. The apartment felt enormous around her, its glass walls reflecting a life built on image rather than truth. She looked at the half-assembled crib at the screws still sealed in plastic, and understood that nothing in this house had been built for permanence. Not the nursery, not the marriage. Her phone buzzed softly on the dresser, and for a moment her heart leaped with foolish hope that Daniel might have reconsidered, might have felt regret. Instead, the message came from an unknown number. He is with her again tonight. Thought you should know. Rachel stared at the words, cold and deliberate. There was no signature, no explanation, but none was needed. The humiliation did not flare this time. It settled quietly. Confirmation had a strange way of bringing clarity. She kissed Noah's forehead gently and whispered an apology he did not understand, promising him silently that she would not allow this environment to shape his understanding of love. She walked slowly into the living room, the baby monitor clipped carefully to her robe. Daniel's belongings were scattered casually across the marble island, as though the space belonged solely to him. His cufflinks gleamed beneath the overhead lights. His watch lay beside an open briefcase filled with contracts and projections. Everything about his world was calculated, strategic, controlled. Rachel's gaze moved toward the window where the city shimmered beneath the darkening sky. Daniel believed she would remain because she feared losing comfort. He believed she depended on his income, his name, his status. What he had never taken the time to notice was that Rachel had her own quiet reserves. Long before she married Daniel, Rachel had inherited something far more valuable than his penthouse or his corporate title. Her family's trust fund, managed discreetly through a private financial firm, had always remained in her name alone. She had never flaunted it, never needed to. She had chosen Daniel because she believed he loved her without knowing the full extent of her independence. The irony tasted bitter now. He had assumed she brought nothing to the table. He had assumed she was small because she had allowed him to feel large. Standing in the center of the polished living room, Rachel felt the power of that hidden truth steady her breathing. Fear tried to whisper practical questions. Where will you go? What will people say? How will he react? But another voice answered more firmly. Anywhere is better than here. She moved deliberately into the bedroom and opened the closet. Instead of reaching for designer dresses or expensive heels, she pulled out comfortable clothes, warm sweaters, and the baby carrier she had purchased herself. She packed only what she could carry: diapers, formula samples from the hospital. Essential documents she had quietly stored months earlier in a drawer Daniel never opened. Her movements were careful, almost methodical, as if rehearsing a plan she had been unconsciously forming for a long time. When she returned to the nursery, she stood beside the unfinished crib for a final moment. The room felt symbolic now, a promise Daniel had never intended to fulfill. She lifted Noah gently into her arms, adjusting the carrier against her chest, so that his small body rested securely against her heart. He stirred briefly, then settled again, trusting her without question. That trust fueled her courage more than anger ever could. She turned off the nursery light and stepped into the hallway, her footsteps quiet but certain. At the front door, she paused, listening to the silence of the apartment one last time. The city beyond the windows continued to glow, unaware that within this expensive space, an empire of illusion was about to lose its foundation. Daniel believed she would stay because she had nowhere else. He believed her fear would outweigh her dignity. Rachel opened the door slowly, feeling the cool hallway air brush against her face. For the first time in days, her breathing felt steady. She was not running away. She was walking toward something truer. And as the elevator doors closed around her, Rachel understood that the most dangerous mistake Daniel had made was underestimating the woman he thought he controlled. The night air hit Rachel's face like a wake-up call, sharp and unfiltered, as she stepped out onto the Chicago sidewalk, with Noah secured tightly against her chest. Snow flurries drifted lazily beneath the streetlights, catching in her hair and melting against her coat, but she barely noticed the cold. Her body was still weak from childbirth, her steps unsteady, yet her mind felt clearer than it had in months. The towering glass building behind her reflected a distorted image of the life she had just left behind, expensive and polished but emotionally bankrupt. She did not look back for long. Looking back meant doubt, and doubt was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her phone battery was nearly drained, and she had nowhere specific to go. Pride kept her from calling family immediately, and instinct warned her against staying anywhere Daniel might think to search first. She began walking without direction, letting the city carry her forward. Cars passed in streaks of white and red light, while strangers hurried along the sidewalks, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding inside one exhausted young mother. Noah stirred softly, and Rachel pressed her cheek gently against his head, whispering reassurances more for herself than for him. She would not let him grow up in a house where love was conditional and dignity negotiable. Her vision blurred suddenly, exhaustion creeping up like a tide she could not hold back. She had not slept properly in days. The emotional weight combined with the physical strain of labor began to catch up with her. Her knees weakened near the corner of a quiet street in Lincoln Park, and for a frightening second the world tilted. Before she could steady herself, a firm hand caught her elbow. Rachel, a familiar voice, asked, startled and concerned. She blinked through the cold and recognized the face leaning toward her. Michael Hayes. He looked older than the last time she had seen him at a college reunion, but his eyes held the same steady kindness. At 34, Michael carried himself with quiet confidence, the calm presence of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. He had become a cardiologist at Northwestern Hospital, a fact she vaguely remembered from social media updates she had once scrolled past without thinking much. Now he stood before her, unexpectedly dressed in a heavy coat and scrubs peeking out beneath it, likely heading home after a late shift. His gaze moved from her pale face to the baby strapped against her chest, and concern sharpened instantly. "What happened?" he asked gently, not with curiosity, but with urgency. Rachel opened her mouth to answer, but no explanation came out. The exhaustion, the betrayal, the cold, everything pressed against her at once. She did not want to collapse in front of him, yet her legs trembled. Michael did not press for details. He stepped closer instead, wrapping his own coat around her shoulders and adjusting it carefully so that it shielded Noah as well. "You shouldn't be out here," he said firmly. "Come with me." There was no pity in his voice, only steadiness. Rachel hesitated for only a second before nodding. Pride could wait. Survival could not. Michael guided her toward his parked car, opening the passenger door with deliberate care. The warmth inside felt almost surreal after the biting wind. As he started the engine, he glanced at her again, measuring the depth of whatever pain she was carrying. He did not ask intrusive questions. He did not judge. He simply drove. His apartment in Lincoln Park was modest compared to the penthouse she had left behind, but it radiated something far more valuable. Warmth. A soft lamp illuminated shelves lined with medical journals and framed photographs. The space looked lived in, authentic rather than staged. Michael helped her settle onto the couch, bringing water and extra blankets without hesitation. Noah stirred slightly but remained calm, sensing safety in the shift of atmosphere. "You're safe here," Michael said quietly. The words hit her harder than Daniel's cruelty ever had. Rachel looked around the small apartment and felt the weight in her chest ease for the first time since the hospital. She had left behind wealth, status, and illusion. In exchange, she had stepped into uncertainty. Yet, sitting there wrapped in borrowed warmth with her son resting peacefully against her, she realized something profound. Sometimes safety did not come from power or glass towers overlooking a city. Sometimes it came from the simple presence of someone who chose compassion without condition. And somewhere across Chicago, Daniel still believed she had nowhere else to go. Daniel Carter did not notice the silence at first. When he returned to the penthouse that following morning, irritation was his dominant emotion, not fear. He expected Rachel to be in the nursery, exhausted but compliant, waiting for him to dictate the next move in their unraveling marriage. Instead, the apartment greeted him with an unfamiliar stillness. The bassinet was gone. The diaper bag was gone. The closet doors stood slightly open, several hangers left empty. For a man accustomed to controlling variables, the absence felt louder than any confrontation. He moved quickly through the rooms, calling her name once, then again, the sharpness in his voice escalating with each unanswered echo. The nursery stopped him cold. The unfinished crib remained in the corner screws, untouched instructions still sealed. It looked like evidence now, a silent accusation he had not expected to face. He reached for his phone and dialed Rachel immediately. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Each failure tightened something in his chest he refused to label as panic. Anger came easier. He paced across the marble floor, replaying their last conversation. She had looked calm when he told her she would stay. Too calm. He had mistaken stillness for surrender. Daniel prided himself on reading people, on anticipating reactions in boardrooms and negotiations. Yet he had completely miscalculated his own wife. He called her family next, disguising urgency as concern. "She's unstable," he suggested smoothly. "Postpartum stress. I'm worried." The performance was seamless. He had always been good at controlling narratives. But Rachel was not answering. At the same time, his phone vibrated with another kind of tension. Emails from the corporate office began flooding in subject lines marked urgent. Daniel had authorized several asset transfers in recent weeks. Adjustments Sophia had assured him were strategic and temporary. He had signed documents, quickly trusting the explanations she offered in private conversations filled with promises about their future. Now those transactions were flagged for review. The finance department required clarification. The board demanded documentation. Timing could not have been worse. Daniel felt the first flicker of genuine unease. He dialed Sophia immediately. The call rang longer than usual before going to voicemail. He sent a message. No reply. He told himself she was busy, perhaps traveling, perhaps avoiding digital communication for caution's sake. But doubt once introduced spreads quickly. He opened his laptop and scanned the transaction summaries more carefully. The numbers were significant. Substantial sums moved into holding accounts linked to Sophia's business entity. He had believed the transfers were temporary protections against market volatility. Now they looked different. Intentional. Permanent. His phone rang again, this time from the company's chief financial officer. The tone on the other end was not friendly. "We need you in the office immediately," the man said. "There are serious concerns." Daniel felt irritation surge again, masking the deeper discomfort building beneath it. He had built half the company's recent growth strategy. He had closed deals others considered impossible. He would not be cornered by internal audits or speculative doubt. He adjusted his cufflinks reflexively, a habit whenever he needed composure. At headquarters, the atmosphere was unmistakably tense. Conversations hushed as he stepped off the elevator. Eyes followed him in ways they never had before. Inside the executive conference room, documents were spread across the table screens, displaying transaction trails and compliance alerts. The chief financial officer did not waste time. These transfers, he said bluntly, were executed without full board approval, and they connect directly to Sophia Lawson. The name sounded harsher in a professional setting stripped of romance. Daniel defended the moves quickly, explaining strategy, confidentiality, long-term positioning, but the room's skepticism was visible. A compliance officer mentioned potential regulatory scrutiny. A board member asked whether personal relationships had influenced corporate decisions. The question hung in the air like a blade. For the first time, Daniel felt heat rise beneath his collar. He realized something slowly, painfully. While he had been orchestrating the collapse of his marriage, he might have been orchestrating something far larger. Back in Lincoln Park, Rachel sat quietly on Michael's couch, unaware of the full storm unfolding. Daniel, meanwhile, stared at the screen displaying flagged accounts and realized a dangerous possibility. If Sophia had misled him, if the transfers were not strategic but self-serving, then he had compromised not only his marriage but his empire. And somewhere beneath the rising tension, another unsettling thought formed. Rachel had left without begging. That, more than anything, unsettled him most. Daniel Carter had built his reputation on precision, but nothing in the executive conference room felt precise anymore. The air was thick with suspicion as board members sat rigidly around the long glass table, their faces lit by the cold glow of financial projections flashing across the screen. Lines of red marked irregular transfers, flagged accounts, and questionable authorizations bearing Daniel's digital signature. He stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, explaining strategy in controlled tones, but the confidence he wore like armor was cracking beneath the surface. For the first time in years, he felt the subtle shift of power slipping from his hands. The chief financial officer spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded professional but carried sharp edges. The transactions linked to Sophia Lawson had triggered automatic compliance alerts, and regulators were already asking quiet questions. Daniel insisted the transfers were temporary protective measures, strategic repositioning ahead of volatile markets, but the explanations sounded thinner as he repeated them. A board member leaned back in his chair and asked the question no one wanted to voice directly. Were these decisions influenced by personal involvement? The room fell silent. Even the hum of the building's ventilation seemed to pause. Daniel's jaw tightened. He denied impropriety, yet the word impropriety hung between them like smoke. He had believed he was in control of every angle, every move. Sophia had assured him everything was structured carefully, legally, intelligently. Now the documentation suggested otherwise. Several holding accounts were tied not only to her consulting firm, but to offshore subsidiaries Daniel had never examined closely. He had trusted her. That realization burned hotter than the board's scrutiny. Trust, he was beginning to understand, could be more expensive than betrayal. Meanwhile, across the city, Rachel sat in Michael's quiet apartment, holding Noah against her chest, unaware that Daniel's professional foundation was fracturing in real time. Michael had stepped into the kitchen reviewing hospital emails on his tablet when his expression shifted subtly. He hesitated before speaking. "There's something you should know," he said gently. Earlier that day, during a routine administrative review, he had come across a confidential medical file linked to Sophia Lawson. He had not searched for it intentionally. It had surfaced during a compliance cross-check connected to corporate health insurance audits. But once he saw the name, he could not ignore it. Rachel listened as Michael explained carefully, his tone measured and professional. The file confirmed permanent infertility due to previous medical complications. Sophia could not conceive. The words settled slowly into Rachel's awareness. Daniel had spoken of building a real family with another woman, yet the biological possibility of that future did not exist. The irony was almost cruel. Rachel did not feel triumph. She felt clarity. Sophia had not promised Daniel love alone. She had promised him an illusion, and illusions, she now understood, were dangerous currency. Back at headquarters, Daniel's phone vibrated repeatedly with unanswered messages to Sophia. She had stopped responding entirely. When he tried calling her again, the line disconnected after a single ring. Panic, once distant, now pressed heavily against his ribs. If she had manipulated him into transferring assets, if the board uncovered personal motives behind corporate decisions, his career could collapse within weeks. Headlines would not distinguish between misjudgment and misconduct. Investors would not care about emotional entanglement. They would see risk, and risk demanded removal. By the time the board adjourned, Daniel was placed on temporary suspension pending internal investigation. The word suspension echoed in his mind as he left the building under the watchful eyes of colleagues who no longer looked impressed. His empire, once seamless and controlled, now felt fragile. He sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel, replaying every conversation with Sophia, every document he had signed, without deeper inspection. Somewhere between arrogance and desire, he had underestimated the wrong woman. What Daniel did not yet know was that Rachel was no longer operating from heartbreak alone. With knowledge came power. With power came strategy. And for the first time since she walked out of the penthouse, she understood that the collapse unfolding around him was not something she needed to orchestrate. It was something he had already set in motion himself. The courtroom did not echo with shouting. It echoed with consequence. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Cook County Courthouse, illuminating polished wood benches and the rigid faces of those waiting for judgment. Rachel Bennett sat quietly at one end of the room, Noah resting peacefully in a carrier beside her chair, while Michael occupied the seat just behind her without drawing attention to himself. She wore no dramatic expression, no visible anger. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady, her composure unshaken. Across the aisle, Daniel Carter looked smaller than he ever had in his glass penthouse office. The months between her departure and this hearing had shifted everything. Daniel's suspension had become termination. The internal investigation had uncovered reckless authorizations and mismanaged transfers tied to Sophia's shell companies. Regulators had stepped in, shareholders had panicked, and the press had moved quickly. Headlines spoke of corporate negligence and personal entanglements. Sophia Lawson had vanished from Chicago quietly, leaving behind unanswered calls and frozen accounts. Daniel, once admired for control, now found himself at the mercy of legal counsel and public scrutiny. Yet here in this room, the matter was not corporate. It was personal. The judge reviewed documents with measured attention while attorneys summarized timelines of abandonment, recorded statements, and financial instability. Daniel's lawyer attempted to soften the narrative, framing him as a stressed executive overwhelmed by professional pressure. But evidence was stubborn. Text messages were presented, voicemail transcripts, testimony from the hospital nurse who remembered his absence. Even the board suspension letter became relevant, not as punishment, but as proof of instability. Throughout it all, Rachel remained calm. She did not dramatize. She did not exaggerate. She spoke only when addressed, her voice controlled and clear. When the judge turned to her and asked why she had left the marital home so soon after childbirth, Rachel's answer was simple. She refused to raise her son in a house where love was conditional and loyalty negotiable. The room fell quiet at the precision of her words. Daniel shifted in his seat, perhaps recognizing too late that the woman he once dismissed as dependent now spoke with quiet authority. There was no bitterness in her tone, only resolve. She did not seek revenge. She sought protection. After careful deliberation, the court granted primary custody of Noah to Rachel with supervised visitation rights assigned to Daniel, pending further review of his legal and financial circumstances. The gavel struck once firm and final, and the sound reverberated more powerfully than any argument presented that day. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the outcome. For a man who once believed he controlled every narrative, the finality was jarring. He had lost far more than position. He had lost proximity to the only part of his life that might have redeemed him. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited, but Rachel declined to speak. She shielded Noah gently from the flashes and walked past reporters without pausing. Michael followed at a respectful distance, offering quiet support rather than attention. The autumn air felt crisp and clean as she stepped onto the sidewalk, a subtle contrast to the tension left behind inside. Chicago moved around her with steady rhythm traffic flowing, strangers passing, life continuing without regard for scandal or status. For the first time in months, her breathing felt completely even. Later that afternoon, she walked through Millennium Park with Noah bundled safely against her chest. The trees were turning shades of amber and gold leaves drifting lazily across the pavement. Michael joined her hands tucked casually into his coat pockets. He did not rush conversation. He did not claim space that was not offered. Instead, he walked beside her in silence, matching her pace. Eventually, he spoke gently, telling her that whatever future she chose, she would not have to choose it alone. Rachel looked down at her son and then out at the open sky above the city skyline. She had once believed her world was built from glass towers and shared last names. Now she understood it was built from choices. Daniel had chosen ambition over loyalty, illusion over truth. She had chosen dignity. As the wind lifted strands of her hair and Noah stirred softly against her heart, Rachel realized something quietly transformative. She had not walked away empty. She had walked away free. Stories like Rachel's are more than dramatic narratives. They reveal a psychological truth that relationship experts often discuss. Betrayal rarely destroys a person in the moment it happens. What truly reshapes a life is the decision that follows. Rachel's turning point was not the betrayal itself, but the moment she stopped accepting a version of love built on control and silence. In behavioral psychology, this is called reclaiming personal agency, the ability to redefine your path even after emotional collapse. Her story reminds us that dignity is often quiet, but it is also powerful. If this journey resonated with you, take a second to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps us keep sharing meaningful stories that explore courage, healing, and self-worth. And before you go, leave a short comment below with 2 simple words that capture the heart of this story. Choose yourself.